So, well, we are grateful for everybody we know is here, and those of you who we don't see, we're glad that you're tuning in. Those of you who may watch later, we are grateful for this opportunity. Just thinking, we were just talking before we started, we are narrowing in on the end of the Proverbs. In fact, we should finish this week, and then we will be on to something else. We have some thoughts about what that might be, but if you have thoughts on that, we'd like to hear it as well. Today we're in chapter 27 of Proverbs. I don't know, Michael, it'd be hard to pick a best chapter of Proverbs, but some of my favorite Proverbs are in this, and maybe I might have found myself circling as many passages in this chapter as any chapter that I can remember. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in here.
Yeah, this wisdom applies in every chapter, Clint, but I would say definitely take time to read this yourself because you're going to find things in here that we're not going to have time to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And right off the bat in verse 1, we get something that you've probably seen in the Gospels. Do not boast about tomorrow. You do not know what a day may bring. This is almost verbatim quoted in the New Testament in a couple of places. And it's just a great, the idea of humility is fairly apparent in this chapter. But this idea, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we've had that conversation before in this study. Saying things is by far easier than doing things. And so it's much easier to talk about something than to follow through. And the Proverbs would suggest that wisdom is not boasting about things that you have not yet done.
Yeah, there's a certain group of people who have had their life changed in an instant. And in conversations with those individuals, there's a kind of appreciation for how grateful one can be in every day. The idea that after that one phone call, an entire world can be turned upside down is theoretically true for most of us, but some of us have experienced that in life, in our own experience. And I think that that kind of transformation of an entire life that can happen, both for good and for bad, we can be sometimes caught off guard at how quickly the tides of life can change.
Yeah, and while the Scripture is generally not a fan of boasting, typically in any fashion, I think there is a certain recognition of our frailty and the humility that goes with it that this proverb points us to. Maybe by the time we finish this book, I'll quit calling these parables. I also love verse 2. Let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. The idea of sort of beating one's own drum or calling attention to oneself is very antithetical to the idea of wisdom and to the Bible in general. And so, again, you can imagine if this is advice given to a young person, hey, you don't have to tell anyone how good you are. If you're good, they'll know it. Let them tell you. Just be good enough to deserve the praise, and then you don't need it.
Yeah, there's some things in Proverbs you might think of as a proverb, and there's other things like that you think that's just good, solid, sound advice.
Yeah, there's no real mystery there. It's just the kind of thing that could help a person, in regard to our girls, and they were fortunate enough to have some success in things, and so I've said these kind of things almost verbatim to them. Hey, don't worry about what other people. You don't need to tell people those things. Just your performance will speak for itself, and I think that's, again, good advice.
So verse 4 here: wrath is cruel, anger is overwhelming, but who is able to stand before jealousy? And that's probably not an order that most of us would put those things in the list in order of. We probably would put cruelty and anger over jealousy. And I think the Proverbs points us to a kind of sinfulness that we are often not comfortable exploring within ourselves. Jealousy, I think, is often a sin that we kind of give ourselves a pass on. Oh, I just kind of want what they want. That's fine. But there's a kind of jealousy that is destructive, and destructive not just in a short term. we have a temptation as humans, I think, to live some of our long trajectories in life driven by jealousy. Jealousy of that C-suite job. Sometimes it's jealousy for a particular kind of family life or a particular image of what it might look like to go on that particular vacation or live in that kind of home. Jealousy is a very powerful force. And even though it may not have the same kind of burning fire, that image we've had of anger previous in this book, though it may not burn down the forest in a moment, it can shape the trajectory of a life in ways we often don't give it credit for. So we should survey our hearts and root out jealousy where we can.
And I think in some ways, jealousy is, to use very sketchy language, a gateway sin. In other words, jealousy may be the very path that delivers us to cruelty or to anger. It can often point us in those directions.
Well, and the amount of destruction that can be done by someone who is jealous. Get in between a jealous person and the outcome, and there will be pain inflicted.
Yeah. That brings me, I don't know if you had 5.
I've got 5 and 6.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
You got it.
Well, number 6 is, verse 6 here, one of my very favorites in all the book of Proverbs. My translation says, well meant are the wounds a friend inflicts, but profuse are the kisses of an enemy. There is another translation that says the wounds of a friend can be trusted. And, it's astounding to me to think in a book that was probably finished in about 700 BC, a man who lived around 1000 BC. So we're talking ideas that are, in this context, somewhere along the lines of 3,000 years old. And the idea that this wisdom has been passed down, that the wisdom of having someone in your life who can tell you things you don't want to hear for your own good. The idea that the wounds of a friend can be trusted, that accountability from someone who cares about you and someone you trust, it is a gift, a painful gift to be sure, but it is a gift, as opposed to flattery of people who don't care about you, as opposed to words that sound good but do you no good. And Michael, I just think verse 6 is one of my, I just think this is a great, great proverb.
Yeah, and I saw 6 in my reading here as connected to 5.
Mm-hmm.
Better is open rebuke than hidden love. And I want to just name here, I think rebuke probably has many interpretations. Some of us have been verbally accosted. Some of us have been rebuked in unhelpful, unhealthy ways. And that's not how I read this. There's a particular author. She's actually a TED Talk speaker and a pretty famous individual. But she wrote in one of her books, "Clear is kind." And that has been for me sort of a mantra. Living in the Midwest where we're not always very clear with what we, with our assessments of things. Sometimes we allow our nice sort of commitments to get in between us and giving honest feedback to someone. That wasn't my experience when we lived out east. I don't know what it was like in Louisville, but when you went in for an assessment, the person did not mince words. Now, it was almost never mean-spirited or intended. Critique was never intended to hurt, but there was a sense in which if you preached a bad sermon, they were just going to tell you that wasn't the best sermon we've ever heard. You made some mistakes. Whereas here in the Midwest, we often say, well, it was pretty good, and then we leave it at that. We don't fill in maybe the piece that would be helpful in giving direction. So clear is kind. If we receive rebuke, that may actually be better than you might think.
Yeah, I do think for our own personal growth, one of the things that we need in our life is a person who we give permission to tell us the truth. And if we can receive that without being offended, if we can receive that without being defensive, that is a good path to personal growth. I also had verse 7, the sated appetite spurns honey, but to a ravenous appetite, even the bitter is sweet. This could be related to the idea of gluttony in the Proverbs. There is this idea of, not letting your appetites get a hold of you. But this could be bigger than that, I suspect. Certainly in its interpretation, it speaks to us of more than food. I think it is behind this is the idea of discipline. If you've ever tried to diet, if you've ever seriously tried to manage what you eat, you know that in the beginning that is brutal. That whatever, say you're a sugar person or a chips person or whatever it is, and you are trying to limit your consumption of those things, it is just rough. But after doing that for a while, those things kind of lose their pull and they get less and less attractive, I guess. They have less and less draw over you. And what I hear in this is the idea of discipline, that once we have exercised discipline, we continue to do it, but the ravenous appetite craves. And there's a fair amount of literature, I think, Michael, in the Bible about managing craving, of not being people who have unhealthy appetites in any area of our life.
Yeah, which is a fundamental human experience, actually. Yeah, definitely. I have verse 12. Is that skipping ahead for you?
Nope.
The clever see danger and hide, but the simple go on and suffer for it. This has lots of ways that you could interpret this, but I do think I've experienced in my own life times in myself and in others when sometimes you are so dead set on an outcome that you just keep grinding it out day by day by day, not realizing that you're just marching into danger. You're marching into bad circumstances instead of stopping and considering what is often cases a much more simple solution, maybe stopping, maybe going somewhere else. There's a sense in which it can be good for us to pause and to reflect on what we're doing and what's happening in our life, because there's sometimes the best solution is an exit strategy. And we sometimes get caught up in pride and the inability to say no, to say, I'm done, we went far enough. And sometimes it's good to stop going on.
Yeah, my next one is 14, which makes me smile. Whoever blesses a neighbor with a loud voice, and you think, well, that sounds good. And then it continues, rising early in the morning will be counted as cursing. And so I hear in this idea that there are some things that we're tempted to do that are far more about us than they are about the person to whom we think we're directing them. So imagine that I'm leaving the house some morning at 5 a.m. and my whole family's asleep and I just yell out, everyone, hey, have a great day. Well, that's not really about them at all. That's about some recognition on my part. And so I think this is, for me, this is kind of shorthand for all of those moments that I have seen people give a false blessing. The kind of nice that isn't nice at all. It's surface nice, but underneath is ego or arrogance or self-reference. And I don't know, I can't swear to the fact that that's what this proverb is about, but that's what I hear in it.
Yeah, Clint, I would only add to that, maybe just a slight difference. Rochelle and I, when we were engaged, we had that pleasure of getting to talk to lots of people about that and share that with lots of people. And the thing that we reflected on then and afterwards is how striking it was, how often you could make a pretty educated guess at the kind of marriage of the person who was talking to you about marriage. They were saying, congratulations, we're so excited for you, Michael and Rochelle, but then it always turned to, well, beware of this, or jokes about this. And often a person who had some pretty biting, sort of sarcastic jokes about marriage, one made a guess, I wonder if things aren't so very good. And others could say, it's going to be a wonderful journey. You're going to have struggles. You need to work together, but it's going to be good. I do think there's a sense in which they intended that as compliment, but it said a lot about the heart of the person who offered it.
Yeah, I think we probably all have dealt with people who point things in one direction, but you have the sense it's really about them. So I think self-reference is a struggle. We probably all face it, and that's what I hear. in that proverb.
17, iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens the wits of another. I can see this being a thing that you would tell a young person. I'll be honest, I say it about every year to the high schoolers here at First Pres. It is my experience that many adults do this, but almost universally, adolescents underestimate the power of their friend group. That desire to be with other people is so strong, to be accepted, that you might miss that the group of people that you find yourself will either sharpen you or they will dull you. And we all like to think that we can live beyond that our willpower is stronger, that whatever is going to be fine for us. But friends, it has been my experience that the people with whom you find company will ultimately be the people that you resemble.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on the fact that this is another one of my favorites, and I have never in any way, shape, or form thought of it communally. This is a personality difference, I'm sure, but I hear in this the idea that battle hardens you, and that struggle makes you better.
That's great.
And that iron clashing together does something for both parties. And so the idea of engagement, the idea of struggle, the idea of debating one another and sharing ideas and challenging one another, and let one person sharpen another. I've seen this on sweatshirts and shirts printed by wrestling teams that have some Christian background. The idea that competition forges people, and so it's good to hear another spin.
I disagree with your interpretation. Let's go.
Okay.
No, that's great. I turn here to verse 20. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, and human eyes are never satisfied. The crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold. So a person is tested by being praised. I do think this returns to the jealousy theme a little bit. But Clint, I think we so often attribute making it, and we define that in lots of different ways, as things being perfect. And Sheol is the definition of imperfection. It's the eternal place of separation. And the idea that we are tempted by things that we put in much higher elevation than they deserve. And yet those things are actually camouflaged emptiness is, for me, pretty compelling. I mean, that image, that the very thing that you might desire above all things might be at the end of our life on earth, the thing that has least value, is a haunting image, really, if you pause and you really reflect on it.
Mm-hmm. I also am very drawn to the idea that a person is tested, at least that's the translation in the Hebrew's sketchy here, according to the footnote in my Bible, but that you are tested by being praised. And you think, no, you're tested by struggle, you're tested by adversity. No, that a person is tested by being praised, because it's when we're praised that we're tempted to ego, to arrogance, to complacency, to all of those things. It is in being praised that it is most difficult to have character and to have integrity. And so I think that's a very interesting thought. I had 3. Know well the condition of your flocks and give attention to your herds. And then really the rest of the chapter kind of spins off of that a little bit. But I am not a person who lives out this proverb. And I think of Tom, going around the building, who knows the condition of every tool in his garage and exactly where it is, who takes his car apart painstakingly and puts it back together. This doesn't come naturally to me. I'm one of those guys who just thinks about things in terms of getting them done. And so the perfectionists among us, they both confuse me, because really sure I get it. But they also impress me in the idea that they truly embody that thing that has always been said: if you're going to do something, do it really, really well. And so that sort of obsessiveness that one can bring to tasks, I think is well spoken of here in this little passage.
I've always felt, as I've met those people and been inspired by those people, I've been fortunate enough to come across a number who have modeled that in I think, good ways. There's a kind of jet stream, I think, that you get into. In other words, the most lowest example of that is, some people's garages are more organized than anything I've ever owned. And those people keeping up organization is way easier than going into a garbage that's just completely disheveled and making it organized. And I think there's a kind of life commitment that as you go, that becomes easier, much like wisdom itself. As you practice wisdom, that muscle grows and it's easier to do so. And one looking from the outside might look into that and think, how in the world do you know the condition of your flocks? My flocks are spread out across 14 counties. Well, once you get into the habit of it, it's more manageable. And there's a sense in which I think it not only becomes easier, we maybe even have a chance of being able to do it longer.
Yeah, and I suppose on the other side of that somewhere is the risk of OCD. But I feel like there is wisdom here in that general advice that what you do well, give it some attention, give it some effort. And while I suspect nobody is able to do that in all parts of their life, we certainly should be trying to do that in as many ways as we can. And I'm grateful for the people I see do it because I learn from them.
Well, friends, I think we only have one favor to ask of you, and that is, as we reach the end of Proverbs this week, would you maybe drop a comment here? Is there a book of the Bible that you would like to study together? That helps us as we make those plans. And otherwise, we would love to see you tomorrow, 2 o'clock Central.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for spending time with us today as we study Scripture together. If you haven't already, we would invite you to follow us on Facebook or subscribe on YouTube. It's a great way to get notified when these studies happen every day at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Of course, if you've already done that, we would love for you to be able to give the video a like, to share it if you're on Facebook. This is a great way for other people to find the Bible study and be able to join us in this time studying Scripture. If this is your first time here, welcome. It's such a joy to have you be with us this day, and we would love to get to know you better. We would love if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to go to our website, fpcspiritlake.org/welcome. We'd love to get your name and email address, and we'll follow up with you personally to thank you for spending time with us this day. And for each and every person that is able to study Scripture and engage in this conversation, we want to say thank you. We look forward to our next time with you every weekday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. And until then, God bless.